A growing list of companies have announced they will stop doing business in Russia. And the government sanctions are, of course, kicking in. Now, the inevitable pushback begins. Some claiming that we are unnecessarily hurting the Russian people. Now, it goes well beyond the big banks cutting off Russian oligarchs from their money. Disney, Warner Brothers have stopped theatrical releases in the country. McDonald's, Starbucks, Coca-Cola all suspended business operations there as well. On Thursday, Western Union announced it was cutting off everyday Russians from their services. This is a call, of course, all in response to Putin's invasion of Ukraine. Groceries and liquor stores in the United States and Europe have pulled Russian vodka from their shelves, with one brand, Stoli, going as far as to change its name to sound less Russian. Video game maker EA Sports announced last week that it would remove Russian and Belarusian national and club teams from its FIFA and NHL games. In the arts world, New York's Metropolitan Opera parted ways with Russian superstar Anna Netrebko after she criticized the war but refused to distance herself from Putin. And film festivals in Scotland and Sweden are barring films made with support from the Russian government. Now, while most of us see these actions as sending a powerful message about standing with Ukraine against a totally indefensible invasion, some are now comparing these moves to the West canceling Russia. They say cultural boycotts do nothing at best to stop the invasion or help Ukrainians. And others are actually claiming that the moves only serve to strengthen Putin's grip on Russia and embolden him to strike beyond Ukraine. In a recent piece for the New Republic, writer Matt Ford argues that taking actions against ordinary Russians plays right into Putin's hand. In it, he writes, quote, "Bullying individual Russians into condemning Putin is unlikely to undermine his standing. If anything, it risks giving him proof of the West's supposed malice toward Russia." Now, I don't buy that. We should determine policy based on what Putin may or may not use as propaganda. You certainly don't want to target Russian civilians, but as Dr. Leon Aaron, the Russia expert we had on the show on Wednesday, said, regime change in Russia will only come when the citizens there have had enough of Putin. Ford seems to think that it's problematic, that, quote, there have also been public calls for top Russian athletes like the NHL's Alex Ovechkin to take a more vocal stance against the Russian government. Considering that his Instagram profile picture is one of him and Putin, and he's long had a close relationship with Putin. In 2017, Ovechkin started a social media movement called Putin Team during the Russian president's re-election campaign. If he doesn't change his position against Putin, why shouldn't we demand more from him? The same way we demand these sorts of things from all high-profile individuals. Here to tell me why I am wrong about this is the New Republic's Matt Ford. Matt, thank you very much for coming on the show. Appreciate it. All right, what am I missing here?
Well, I think the key is sort of targeting and how broad a brush we're painting with. You mentioned Alex Ovechkin. He certainly has close ties to Putin. That may make him a more viable target. But we also have to look at other Russians. We have to look at Russian students, for example. There were calls by members of Congress recently, as a couple of weeks ago, to exclude them from American universities. Now, these are students who could go back and who could learn about the virtues of liberal democracy and who could talk about that back home. And instead, we risk alienating and attacking them. I think that, while there is certainly a lot of appetite and certainly a lot of justified appetite for going hard on Russia, we have to make sure that we're not making enemies where we could be making friends.
As I read your article, I thought back to South African apartheid, right? And I remember that the argument that people who were against sanctions on South Africa kept saying, well, you're just hurting the South African people, right? You have to be very careful here because, the government's going to do what it wants, but all these sanctions are doing is hurting the people. And yet they worked incredibly well in forcing the government there to change its ways and ultimately leading to significant change. And it sounded to me like the arguments you're making against the sanctions and the boycotts are sort of reminiscent of that. Is that not fair?
I mean, I would certainly disagree, but I think the key difference here is that the Russian population does not have as much freedom to criticize what their government is doing as white South Africans had to criticize what the South African government was doing. We know from the past 15 to 20 years that Putin is more than willing to kill dissidents, whether they be journalists reporting on corruption in Russia, whether they be opposition politicians who suddenly come down with mysterious cases of poisoning, whether they be double agents and ex-spies who move to the West and suddenly find themselves drinking cups of radioactive materials. For a Russian, especially a prominent Russian overseas, to criticize Putin, that is dangerous. And I think we need to recognize that when we put pressure on them to act, we can support their courage if they speak out against Putin. We should welcome it. We should encourage it, in a passive sense, but we should not actively put them in a position where they have to denounce their own government and put their lives on the line. That could prove to be counterproductive.
All right, but let's put that aside for a moment, right? The idea of saying that people who are going to have to go back, what they say, et cetera, in terms of the actions being taken, right, by companies pulling out, et cetera, out of Russia. Do you have a problem with that?
No, I don't. I think economic boycotts have a very powerful advantage here. Certainly the United States has used them to strong effect with the help of the Western allies. And they make a lot of sense in terms of grinding the Russian war machine to a halt. Those give the West leverage to sort of get Putin out of the situation when he eventually has to come to the table and hammer out some sort of agreement, whether that's in 2 weeks, 2 months, whenever. But I disagree with cultural boycotts, where we sort of treat Russians, especially Russians overseas, as sort of, automatic connections to the regime, as dealing with a broad brush, and focusing on them in ways that treat them discriminatorily.
How about the oligarchs? I mean, you have a problem with
fair game.
You have a problem with going after them? They're fair game?
No, not at all. See, the Russian oligarchs are in a good position. And by that, I mean that they have the ability to influence policy and politics in Russia. The average ordinary Russian, the ones who may have sent their student to a school in the United States, who may have immigrated here, who may have opened a restaurant here, they don't have a say. But the oligarchs can change Putin's mind.
Yeah, look, I have no problem. I agree with you. Someone who's a Russian who's living in the United States, I don't want to hold it against them, the fact that they were born in Russia or they've got a Russian accent. Of course, that shouldn't immediately be held against them. But I do think that when it comes to high-profile figures who don't want to come out against Putin, if your argument is their lives are going to be in danger, okay, that's an argument I would consider. But for some of them, I think the problem is that they have been pro-Putin in the past. And I think we can hold that against them. I think we should hold that against them now. No?
Well, I mean, absolutely. People are accountable for their actions and what they do. I also think, however, that as Americans well know, just because you support a politician doesn't mean you support everything they agree with. Not all Democrats support everything Joe Biden does.
Come on.
Certainly not all Republicans.
You're going to compare this. I apologize for interrupting,
saying,
but you're going to compare Putin to Biden and politicians here in the United States, really?
Well, just to make the point that, look, just because you may have supported Putin in the last election does not mean necessarily that you're on board with attacking Ukraine. You noted Alex Ovechkin. He had a message out where he called for peace. That is oppositionally different than what Vladimir Putin wants. He thinks Ukraine is part of Russia. It's not a real country. It should be absorbed and everything. Calling for peace between two sovereign countries is a direct opposition to his policy. And I think we could agree that he could do more. But he's certainly doing something.
But Putin claims that this isn't even an invasion. So, I mean, as far as Putin's concerned, there isn't an invasion of Ukraine. So calling for peace, Putin would say, hey, that's all I'm looking for, too. I'm looking to take out the dangerous parts of Ukraine. I want peace. It's exactly what Putin would say, no?
Well, I think the logic works the other way. If you're calling for peace, that means you're acknowledging that there's a war. But I think more seriously, we should be encouraging Russians. When they do speak out, we should be supporting them. But when they don't speak out, we should understand that they have to make a different calculation than you or I do when we speak about politics here in the United States.
Yeah, look, and I respect that argument. I think of all the arguments that you make, that's the strongest one, which is if someone's going to have to speak out and they're going to have to go home, they could end up getting killed. Okay, that I get. But I think it felt to me like you went much further than that in the article, but I'd encourage everyone to read it and make a decision for themselves. Matt Ford, thank you very much for coming on the program. Good conversation. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for watching. Click the red subscribe button below so you can get more of NewsNation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.